This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel, broadcasting remotely. It's Inauguration Day, and our nation's capital has been fortified to keep President-elect Joe Biden and others safe. But heightened security measures and COVID-19 will make this inauguration stand out from the traditional ceremony in years past. Coming up Where We Live, we talk to political scientist Jennifer Hopper, and we hear from Connecticut residents who've attended past inaugurations. We'll ask them to weigh in about this moment in history. First, joining us by Zoom from Washington, D.C. is Connecticut's 3rd District Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, who will be attending the inauguration today. Congresswoman DeLauro, welcome to Where We Live.
Thank you so much. It's a delight to be with you. This is a remarkably special day.
I've seen different reports that the inauguration starts around 11 o'clock this morning. I know that you've attended other inaugurations. What's different for you today?
Well, you know, clearly the difference is in the way that the security that surrounds, today's event, the mobs and the throngs and the thousands and thousands of people who are usually here to witness the inauguration of the new president of the United States. And we have to do without that today, but because of the insurrection on January 6th. But what is critically important about today is that the resiliency of our democracy. This is a nation that stands strong, and that is what we celebrate today, is the inauguration of President Joseph Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. And in that sense, it is such a joyous day. What's different, I didn't have to socially distance in the past, didn't have to wear a mask. And again, it's all the security precautions.
Congresswoman, you mentioned the security. So are you expected to be in place much sooner than in past inaugurations?
Yes, yeah. We will, because we have to check in. Everyone had to be tested beforehand. There's a screening, and as it should be, there should be a safety. As I said, given what happened on January 6th, and I'm confident that the precautions that have been put in place will allow for the safety of this event today.
You talked about the transfer of power when President-elect Joe Biden becomes the 46th president of the United States. It's also different this time because President Trump will not be in attendance. This is breaking a 150-year tradition of having presidents there for inaugurations of their successor. How do you feel about that?
Well, I have to be very, very honest with you, given the 4 years and what President Trump put this nation through, the people of this country through. I'm just happy to see him leave, and his activities, particularly in the last several weeks, and the insurrection, the motive to overthrow the federal government on January 6th, which is something that he instigated, is appalling. That a United States president would do that. He was responsible for that day. And quite frankly, he is now responsible for Washington, D.C. Being an armed camp with National Guard and with Metropolitan Police and Capitol Police. And so for me, his departure is welcomed.
I mentioned that President Trump made the decision not to attend, but as you just said, President Trump is not really welcome there either. NPR reporting that Biden called Trump's decision not to attend, quote, one of the few things he and I have ever agreed on. And that's not to also forget that this is a president that's been impeached for a second time. As we look at this inaugural address coming up later today, what do you want to hear from President-elect Biden?
Well, let me just say this, that we have experienced a lot of pain, especially in the last several weeks. And what is just so fortifying is today we inaugurate a president who is determined to unite our country, not to divide it, not to pit one group against another, but to bring people together, to embrace the values of this great nation. So I'm looking forward to listening to the president and to watching him. And I might add that what just last week, I was pleased with the economic relief package that the president spoke about. So many people have died, 400,000 people in this nation. People have lost their jobs. And what he is proposing is that the vast majority of Americans will receive the help that they need to get some relief that they need. And so it's such a good start that we extend unemployment benefits and add an additional $400 to that we make direct payments to people, that we have a child tax credit to lift families and children out of poverty, and to have food assistance. People are hungry in the United States, and that there is an emphasis on controlling this virus and bringing it to heal so that we can heal and move on to a recovery. And I think the thread going through these remarks today will be one of healing. And the president-elect said last night at the Lincoln Memorial that in order to heal, we need to remember, and there needs to be accountability, and there needs to be responsibility. And that will begin a healing process for this nation.
President-elect Biden will be speaking to all Americans, including a portion of them that supported Donald Trump, and they believe that Joe Biden did not win this election. When you talk about the importance of unity and unifying the country, how will this new administration speak to those Americans who, again, still believe that this election was fraudulent?
Well, I think that's the very point. We have had a president for 4 years, as I said, who has divided the country, who has lied time after time after time, who's tried to suppress people's voting rights, who have made statements about this election that have been proven false, not by me or others or in a partisan way, but by the legal entities who make those decisions. That Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won, and they won overwhelmingly. And so he has spoken to the people in this nation of lying to them over and over and over again. And yes, people have believed him. So now it is a question of unraveling those lies. And I think that when you have the bully pulpit, as the president of the United States does, the strength of the words, and words matter and have consequences. And when you then begin to listen to someone who brings that strength and that engages people and says to them, we are together. We are the United States of America. We are leaders in the world, and that we need to embrace one another. And it is not about pitting each other against each other. And that starts at the top with the strength of that message. Now, it is not going to turn around overnight. It isn't. But at least we have someone now who brings a set of values and a morality to government that has been so lacking in the past. And my hope is that step by step and together with leaders on both sides of the aisle, that we can rebuild and that we can bring people together in common ground so that we can build for the health security of this country and the economic security. And when they see someone, we've had a president who has not focused on the health of this country, has walked away from that effort, and one who has not brought economic security. And we now have an opportunity as elected officials, both sides of the aisle, with a leader who says, let us conquer this virus so that we can recover and that we can have economic security for the future, for our families and for our children.
Congresswoman DeLauro, how worried are you about extremism in our country? 25,000 National Guard members are part of this security today for the inauguration. I've heard reports that they may stay there even after the inauguration. So how do we move this country forward?
Well, I think, look, and I'm part of an effort of, that is looking, it's investigating the security around and the Capitol. I think we have to call out white supremacy for what it is and the hate, that it brings. But I think we have to start by overseeing and investigating an effort, one that cannot be short-circuited, to get to the bottom of what happened. And that's what I said a moment ago about accountability and responsibility. And we cannot begin to heal unless we do that. There will be an impeachment trial. And again, the effort to investigate. And to that end, on the 26th, several subcommittees of the Appropriations Committee, which I chair, each of these subcommittees has some part of the law enforcement entities in the Capitol, and we'll bring them together with the various agencies and to begin the questioning. The Speaker has designated Lieutenant General Honore to begin an investigation of what happened, with the intent that it should not happen again, and that we can bring to justice those who are perpetrated and instigated this violence.
It's been only 2 weeks when that mob stormed the Capitol. How have you and your staff processed what happened?
Well, it is a process. Thank you for saying that. One has to go through that. And I was in the House gallery when we were told to grab gas masks. And no sooner than that happened, we were told that the Capitol had been breached. They had tear gassed the insurrectionists in the rotunda. They were making their way to the chamber doors of the House of Representatives, which is only a very short distance. Those doors were barricaded. We began to be evacuated, and the insurrectionists broke the windows of the door and were screaming and shouting. And there was gunfire, and the police told us to hit the ground. We crouched behind seats in the gallery until we were finally evacuated, and we saw in the corridor there the rioters on the floor, spread-eagled, with the Capitol Police with guns over them. I was with a young staff member that day who was in an office on the second floor of the Capitol, right where all of this was happening. So he was barricaded in that office, and hearing the shouts and the gunfire, and he's a strong young man, but these are not events that don't make an indelible mark on who you are. So people will be processing it. We're hoping to, that there is counseling for people who need it, because it's important to reflect on what happened, and to sort through your feelings, your own feelings, about where you were, what happened, and how you can move forward. So we're all beginning to do that.
Unprecedented security in Washington, D.C. today. You're confident that it will be safe for you and others attending the inauguration, Congresswoman?
Yes, I am confident. I think they've taken extraordinary precautions. Nothing is ever 100%, but I feel very confident in attending today. And I believe today is important, and I think that the president-elect determining that he will be on the west front of the Capitol, as will the vice president, and the leadership of the House and the Senate. That's important for the American people to know the resiliency of our democracy. And while there were those who tried to trample it, to try to overturn it, that they cannot do it. That was why that evening we went back to the House chamber to continue the counting of the electoral votes, which was our constitutional mandate, to let the country know and the world know that we stand and we stand tall, and we will carry out the government, but we also would adhere to and eschew to the values of the United States of America.
That's 3rd District Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro joining us from Washington, D.C. Before she leaves to attend the inaugural ceremony, each member of Connecticut's delegation will be in attendance. Congresswoman DeLauro, thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you very, very much. Stay safe.
This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Coming up, we talk to a political scientist from Southern Connecticut State University, Jennifer Hopper, and we hear from other Connecticut residents who've attended past inaugurations. Will you be watching President-elect Biden's inaugural address? We want to hear from you. You can join us, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. Or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel, broadcasting remotely. In just a few hours, President-elect Joe Biden will take his oath of office and then deliver his inaugural address. What do you want to hear from the 46th president? You can join our conversation, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. I want to welcome to the show now on Zoom Jennifer Hopper, Associate Professor of Political Science at Southern Connecticut State University. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Lucy. Thanks for having me today.
We just heard from Congresswoman DeLauro talking about this unprecedented security in our nation's capital and the ceremony that will be taking place in just a couple of hours. Can you talk through what stands out to you about the plans in place to get the new president to do his inaugural address without having issues pop up like we saw 2 weeks ago?
Yes. So it's somewhat interesting because it is such a long historical tradition, Inauguration Day, the provisions of which are outlined in the Constitution. And so there's so many long-standing aspects of the symbolic, democratic, peaceful transfer of power that we associate with today. And then yet in the midst of a pandemic and after the events of the Capitol attack, it looks so different than some of those other cases that we're so used to seeing. So in one sense, the events of January 6th, I think, have helped prepare local law enforcement and local political figures to be able to prepare for today. There is an overwhelming presence of the National Guard in Washington, D.C. There is an even stricter lockdown than what we've been associating with the pandemic. There's fencing all around the area in which the inauguration is going to take place, various checkpoints, et cetera. The members of the National Guard and other law enforcement that are going to be in most close contact with the new president have been thoroughly vetted by law enforcement agencies. And so it really will look quite different. And of course, the absence of the crowds as well, that we're so used to seeing people congregating in front of the inauguration events taking place. And it will be a much more sparse and socially distanced crowd this year.
You mentioned the crowds. I've seen reports that up to 200,000 people are in D.C. during the inauguration, and they are replaced this time with flags in the National Mall, Jennifer.
Yeah, so a sort of public art display to stand in for people who are encouraged to watch from home instead. And in that way, it's not that different from what so many of us have experienced over the past year, you know, birthdays, celebrations, weddings via Zoom and other kinds of virtual means of attending and commemorating events, that the inauguration is going to follow suit with that today with a number of virtual ways of celebrating the transition of power.
You can join our conversation, 888-720-9677, as we reflect on today's inauguration and those that have come before. Nick Boletta is joining us on the phone. He's the former chair of the state Democratic Party, someone who has attended past inaugurations. Nick, welcome to Where We Live.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
So how are you feeling about today?
It goes back and forth. I mean, I'm missing not being there. It's going to be the first. Attended the last 4 inaugurations, so it's just such an impressive day and morning, and to watch the peaceful transfer of power, it's just an incredible feeling, and just such a part of history. And it's as I say, the Super Bowl of democracy in action to watch. So I'm missing that part of it. But to see President Trump get on that plane and leave for the final time was just an incredible thing to see this morning. It was kind of a sigh of relief, I think, for most people and most Americans.
New York Times reporting that President Trump left the White House on a red carpet, hand in hand with Melania Trump. He spoke briefly with reporters before boarding that helicopter. He stood in the doorway one last instant, waving goodbye. The Marine One helicopter took off from the south lawn of the White House at about 8:18 this morning for a short flight to Joint Base Andrews in suburban Maryland. There, the president held a farewell event with administration veterans and other supporters, and he and Mrs. Trump departing then to Florida, where they will reside. How do you feel about the fact that everyone is hoping for this peaceful transfer of power today? Again, unprecedented security, Nick, but the idea that the current president will not be there.
I think one of the biggest hits to his ego was that he told people he wouldn't be there, and everybody was like, okay. The the president-elect certainly said that he didn't care, and that was fine. I think it's a slap to him, Donald Trump, and I think it will hurt him throughout history. I think anything that he did do that was good, which is going to be difficult to find, is just going to be crushed by this, and this is all people are going to talk about. Obviously the handling of his pandemic and this, I think it's just completely ruined his presidency.
Jennifer Hopper, what's your take on the fact that the president will not be there, but Vice President Michael Pence will be?
Yes, it's not insignificant that Pence is participating. I think it's important, again, from a Democratic perspective, that some prominent member from the previous administration does indicate that this is a normal process, that this is a legitimate process. I understand the sentiment, even within the Biden team, a kind of sense of relief that President Trump was not going to attend, and how much focus there might be, for instance, on things like his facial expressions during Biden's inaugural address, were he to be seated on the dais with the other former presidents and other political figures. But in not attending, Trump also sends a very clear message to his base of committed supporters that he does not support this transfer of power, and to continue to reinforce the views that he's expressed over the past few weeks and the past few months, that the electoral outcome was illegitimate in his view. And that, I think, is potentially damaging as the country tries to move forward with a common purpose toward meeting the pandemic and economic problems and other things that require perhaps a more united front amongst Americans as a whole.
At the same time, Nick, we know that Mr. Trump is a norm buster. That's certainly what we have seen over the last 4 years. Something that he said that's been reported, that he hoped his exit from the White House was, quote, not a long-term goodbye. What do you read into that, Nick?
I mean, I certainly think with his ego, and that he would certainly love to run again and come back, and he certainly potentially wants to run again and run what the Republican agenda is going to be for the next 4 years and attacking the president. I think that really came to an extreme halt 2 weeks ago on the attack on the Capitol. And I think that has changed his role in that. I think has changed any great American's mind on what they would believe is Donald Trump.
You mentioned, Nick, that you've attended 4 past inaugurations.
Yes.
Walk us through what that's like to be among all of those people. And, depending on the weather, it can be pretty cold in D.C. this time of year.
Well, that's absolutely. It's my I definitely bring out my thermal underwear and wear that every 4 years. And it's very, very cold. It's wide open, as everybody could see. So if it's windy, it's just very, very, very cold. And it's a long process. You have to start it. You have to be out there by 6:00 in the morning, usually in lines to get through all the security and get to where you're going to be seated or where you're going to be standing, depending on what area you had tickets. In the Obama first election, they had a disaster where they ran people through a tunnel that got overcrowded and overrun, and they ended up having to shut it down. So thousands of people never even made it into the inauguration. So it is a little chaotic. No matter how well they do it, but it is amazing, just an amazing ceremony to see, amazing feeling to be there in that crowd and to feel the momentum with everybody there together and just see that peaceful transfer of power that happens nowhere else in the world like we do it.
So today, Nick, you'll be watching at home?
Yes, I will. I'll be watching at home, and I'll be missing. So the usual, what happens is right after this, they usually have the luncheon. So most people go and have a nap after the inauguration, and then you got to get ready for the balls and all the celebrations at night, which obviously will not be taking place. The balls are just once in a lifetime experience. I attended one at the Kennedy Center that was just magnificent, and people really, really you can't get that feeling unless you're there. And it's being a presidential elector multiple times. Also, this was great this year to be able to vote for Joe Biden, knowing that there was going to be a huge change. And just the amount of votes that he got was he won by a mandate, and no one can question it. Soon to be former President Trump, and his people can't question his mandate and the size of the win by Joe Biden.
But yet they still continue to question it, Nick. We'll see what the next few weeks and months bring. Nick Boletto, thank you for calling in today. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
We want to hear from you, too. What are you hoping to hear from this inaugural address of President-elect Joe Biden? Also, Kamala Harris taking the oath of office as well. You can join us 888-720-9677 or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Amanda's calling in from Hamden. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Lucy. How are you?
I'm doing okay. So where will you be watching?
Well, we have 3 generations of girls and women here. It's me and my mother and my daughter, and we're watching from home. Really excited to celebrate that yesterday was the very last day that we would ever say a woman has never been vice president.
So it's a good feeling in your family. What do you want to hear from President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris?
What do you want to hear, Mom?
Hope for the future. It's been so depressing this last year or so. So it's hope, something new and uplifting. I have great hope for Biden. Him going to church this morning to start his day was a step in the right direction.
And how about you, little one? What do you want to hear?
Good stuff.
Good stuff. Yeah, we're tired of the bad stuff.
Yes.
Well, thank you for calling in today, Amanda and her mom and daughter, I believe, all in Hamden. Excited for Kamala Harris to become the first woman vice president. Jennifer Hopper, talk about the significance. We don't want to forget that this is a momentous moment for many people to see, many women, many people of color.
Enormously significant. In political science, we talk about different ways of thinking about representation. And just one of those concepts is that government should look like the United States. It should look like America, that when people look at the elected officials that represent them, they should see people who have experiences that are similar to them, backgrounds that are similar to them. So for women of color, to have Kamala Harris in such a prominent position, in such a powerful position, and with a wide open future potentially, right, to run for president herself and for other women running for president, hugely important to have models like that in government, in national government.
You can join our conversation. We want to hear from you as you prepare to watch or listen to the Vice President and President-elect Joe Biden as they give their remarks after the oath of office taken around noon today. You can join us 888-720-9677. You can also watch special coverage from PBS at ctpublic.org all throughout today, and special coverage from NPR on Connecticut Public Radio. Again, Jennifer, when we think about this moment, unprecedented security, this is a real about face for Democrats in Washington who in the past would not want the military to respond to protests like this. But they are now pushing for an armed military to be there to make sure that it is secure on Inauguration Day. Can you talk about that significance?
Yes. So following the events of January 6th, where I think all observers recognized that was a huge lapse in terms of the law enforcement response to those individuals who broke into the Capitol, that there was a kind of overcorrection, perhaps, from some federal law enforcement authorities from some of the protests during the summer in which they were criticized for maybe being overzealous in their response, using too much show of force, particularly against some Black Lives Matter protesters in the summer of 2020. That some of that and a lack of communication and coordination between different law enforcement agencies may have led to some of the security lapses that we saw on January 6th. And so it is certainly the case that some Democratic politicians, right, were much more robust in their calls for a firm military presence and a strong show of law enforcement in the events leading up to today. Because of a sincere concern about the safety of elected officials. Right? Members of Congress, and you heard a little bit of Congresswoman DeLauro's experience on January 6th, right, felt concretely the potential threat that was being perpetrated by those individuals who broke into the Capitol and defied all those security measures a few weeks ago. And so I think that certainly lit a fire under individuals who are participating in today's events to make sure that events like that would not occur again.
You can join us again, 888-720-9677. Bridget's calling in from East Hartford. Bridget, I understand you've been to past inaugurations?
Yes, I have. I went in 2012. It was a group. We were left on a bus from Bloomfield, probably about 60 of us, and we went down there. Wonderful experience. Wonderful experience. It was bitterly cold, but I ended up on the mall, and a million plus people. And the irony is, I ran into people that I knew that actually came from my sister, for one. So and my cousin. So it was a very good experience. We ended up watching it. It was a big screen on the mall, so we couldn't get that close, but it was still a great experience being there and watching it from the big screen, on the big screen.
And how will you be watching or listening today, Bridget?
On the big screen in my living room.
So not quite the same, but what will you be looking forward to hearing from President-elect Biden?
Well, I'm really interested in the of the education system. Being from Hartford and watching him confirm Dr. Cardona's appointment, or wanting to confirm it, it is of grave concern to me as a parent and as somebody from the urban community, how this whole thing is going to play out. So I think that's the biggest thing, education. And, actually, too, employment and the coronavirus, having that. I'm a veteran, actually, on my way to the VA right now, and the giving of the coronavirus vaccine has been a little slow. So I'm hoping, that speeds up a little bit.
Well, thank you, Bridget, for calling in today on Where We Live. You can too, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. We should mention before we head to break, Jennifer, that President-elect Biden's first order of business, signing 17 executive orders, including what Bridget just mentioned, looking at pandemic response, but also the environmental rollbacks under the Trump administration, also looking at immigration and economic recovery. This seems like a lot to do on the first day.
Yes, they're hitting the ground running. There is a tremendous amount in the modern era that presidents can do unilaterally without Congress. And we know that President Biden and his team have already prepared executive orders, placing a pause on student loan interest and payments, rolling back the Keystone Pipeline permit, rescinding the Trump travel ban, having a mask mandate for federal property and interstate travel. So those are policies that change from one day to the next as a new president is inaugurated and affect people's daily lives very directly.
Again, you're hearing Jennifer Hopper, who's an associate professor of political science at Southern Connecticut State University. This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Coming up, we'll continue to hear from Connecticut residents about this historic day. Myrna Watanabe will join us. She's one of Connecticut's electors, and she's the former town chair of the town of Harwinton's Democratic Town Committee. You can join us too. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel, broadcasting remotely. Today is Inauguration Day. We hope you stay with Connecticut Public Radio throughout the day for special coverage, including a special call-in program. Tonight at 8, I'll be co-hosting the hour with Connecticut Public Radio's John Henry Smith. And again, we want to hear from you about how you're feeling about our country and the new presidential administration. That call-in number, the same one we use on Where We Live, 888-720-9677. You can join that conversation tonight at 8 on Connecticut Public Radio and streaming live at WNPR.org. Again, with me on Zoom, Jennifer Hopper, Associate Professor of Political Science at Southern Connecticut State University. And joining us now is Myrna Watanabe. She's one of Connecticut's electors for the 2020 Electoral College, and she's the former town chair of the Harwinton Democratic Town Committee. Myrna, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lucy. It's good to be here.
So I mentioned you're one of the 7 Connecticut electors. What does it mean to be part of that, have been part of that process for this presidential election, and looking at today's events? What are you thinking about?
Well, what it was, first of all, was a great honor. And even though I refer to myself as a political hack, and that's sort of how you become an elector, nevertheless, I was greatly honored to participate in this because, there's this over 200-year history. And I was in living history. The other thing that interested me and excited me about it was that when the founders came up with the Electoral College, they certainly wouldn't have thought of women being part of the Electoral College, women being part of anything that elected anything. And it was thrilling, not just to vote for Joe Biden, my significant vote, because the only votes were 7 votes from Connecticut that we were capable of having, because those are the only votes that truly count. So that I could do that, I could be one of the 7, and also that I could be one of the 7 for the first woman of color as a vice president. I mean, women of color were nobody. They didn't exist politically when the Constitution was written.
Mm. So what's your response as an elector, Myrna, to what happened on January 6th? And again, there are Americans in our country who still believe that Joe Biden did not win this election.
Well, let me begin by saying that when we got to the Capitol, the 7 electors and some other people who were there, because in case the electors didn't show up, but when we got there, one of the things impressed upon us by Secretary of State Merrill was that the Electoral College, being there in the Capitol and doing your votes for the president and vice president, was generally just pro forma. but this year it was not. This year, these votes were important. And one of the things she pointed out is, well, we don't expect that Connecticut's votes are going to be challenged, but you will never know. And one of the things I watched was, what, or were the Connecticut votes going to be challenged? Was some, not so wise, we should say, member of Congress going to get up and say, no, we don't like the Connecticut votes because blah, 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 blah. And of course, this was all part and parcel of the belief that people had, at least some people had, and certainly those who stormed the Capitol, that this election was not real. This election was fake. This election was rigged.
Jennifer Hopper, I'd asked that question to Congresswoman DeLauro about how America can move forward when that narrative continues to exist, that this was a fraudulent election. I'm just wondering if you had some thoughts on how to counter this, because again, courts have thrown out the legal challenges brought by Donald Trump and his supporters that this was a fraudulent election. We have people on both Republican and Democratic election officials in the states that some tried to contest, that say that the results were fair and counted accurately. And so I'm just wondering your thoughts about this continued conversation.
Yes, it's a very difficult question because despite evidence, individuals talking about there being no evidence of election fraud, right, of the election being highly secure, right, and producing legitimate results, it's been incredibly difficult to reach a certain segment of the American public with that information, or when they are confronted with that information, it just kind of bounces right off because it doesn't fit into their pre-existing worldview. There are, I think, some things that limit the spread of misinformation. So there was a recent data analysis that showed that in the time since President Trump was banned from Twitter and some QAnon proponents were taken off of Twitter as well, that misinformation that was circulating via tweets has declined significantly in those days since that happened. So to a certain extent, it's about sort of responsible social media practices, et cetera. But I think really, for instance, for the new Biden administration, it's going to be about actions. There are certain things that do unite Americans toward a common goal. I think, across the board, people of all political persuasions want the pandemic to be over, want the economy to recover. If it's possible for the Biden administration to make inroads in better distribution and faster distribution of a vaccine, for instance, for hastening the end of this crisis that the country has faced, potentially maybe that starts to then affect the mindset of even those most committed proponents of false information about the election to kind of take a new mindset toward the legitimacy of the new administration.
You're hearing Jennifer Hopper, who's an associate professor of political science at Southern Connecticut State University, and with us also on Zoom, Myrna Watanabe, one of Connecticut's electors. Myrna, you've been to past inaugurations. Tell us which ones and what that was like for you.
Well, I was at the first and second Obama inaugurations, and the atmosphere at the first Obama inauguration was just absolutely thrilling. You had hundreds of thousands of people there who were absolutely ecstatic that we were going to go to an administration that would not be torturing people. At least we hope they would not be torturing people, that would not be carrying out these wars in the Middle East, that we had a brilliant and very verbal president. We had somebody that we felt very secure about. And it just was this overwhelming thrill of the crowd. You could feel it. It was pulsating in the atmosphere. And people were talking to each other and excited. I had nice chats with the people next to me and in front of me. And it was this feeling that this is the change we wanted. This was the change we voted for.
And today you were able to watch some of the coverage of President Trump leaving the White House. Can you tell me your reaction?
I don't think it's really a reaction that's for general consumption, but in fact, it was great and tremendous relief. He's a human wrecking ball, and I'm surprised he left the White House standing intact. And he certainly was trying to wreck the government. Everything that meant something, certainly to me personally, to my family, to my friends, I would hope to the bulk of the people in this country, was damaged in some way, shape, or form. And we have to start by undoing the damage and putting giant Band-Aids on it.
Jennifer Hopper, we just have a few minutes left. Again, today, a lot of people watching to see what happens in D.C. Again, unprecedented security, but extremism doesn't just go away by the snap of our fingers. And I'm curious if you could talk about what officials, not only in D.C., but around our country, will be having to watch for in the coming future.
Yes, so law enforcement officials, as well as some journalists and citizen activists, have monitored a lot of the talk and chatting that goes on in various online forums, particularly amongst these right-wing extremist groups. There was some concern that potentially that they would be targeting today. And so they've used the information that they glean from watching their surveillance of individuals' conversations about potential plans and organizing, et cetera, to try to thwart a lot of those. We've seen a number of arrests and crackdowns of people who were involved in January 6th or who might be involved in further planning and plotting. It does become somewhat difficult. So I had mentioned briefly some of the bans of certain people on Twitter. Parler, which was a popular social media outlet for right-wing groups, has also been shut down. But as that happens, some of the communications that go on between these various groups may be in venues that are not as easily watched by journalists, by law enforcement, et cetera, encrypted apps and things of that nature. So that's something that's going to present a new challenge for trying to monitor groups that may be actively planning insurrection against the United States government or violence against public officials and other kinds of public monuments.
And we'll have to leave it there. I want to thank Jennifer Hopper again for joining us, Associate Professor of Political Science at Southern Connecticut State University. I assume your students will be watching today.
Yes, they will. I require them to. So yes, they will be watching.
Also want to thank Myrna Watanabe for joining us, one of Connecticut's electors for the 2020 Electoral College, former town chair of the Harwinton Democratic Town Committee. Myrna, thank you for your time as well.
Well, thank you for letting me speak.
Today's show was produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Carmen Baskoff was on the phones today. And remember, we're going to have a live call-in special tonight at 8. Join me in Connecticut Public Radio's John Henry Smith as we reflect on this moment in our country's history. And we definitely want to hear from you. That call-in number for tonight, 888-720-9677. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel.